up guys, and welcome back to the channel. Today for you, I will be delivering my promise on a bunch of new Tearlaments decks. I'll be telling you which I think are the best, which I think are my favorite, and then all the options that you really can use to still keep this deck going. I think this deck is still very strong, arguably even the best deck still. Does depend on the meta, as well as some of the tech cards I'll show you, but I'll explain more in the video. And yeah, I really love Tearlaments. Obviously, that's why I keep making videos about them, so I hope you guys appreciate that as well, and you can see that they are still very much playable. Anyways, before I begin, obviously go check out tsx1.com and use the code potato10 for 10% off on your sleeves. My favorite sleeves, although obviously if you're a Macedo player, you may not need them. I recommend you hop over to TCG, and when you do, get those sleeves. Anyways, yeah. Also, if you want to catch me playing this deck, you should do so on my stream. And I've now created a VOD channel, which I will have in the description links, Jesse Cotton Yugioh VOD, where I'm going to post all my VODs from Twitch. That way they aren't deleted after 16 days or whatever by Twitcher. Yeah, so I think that's all. I will jump right into the deck lists. Okay, so here I have the first version of Tearlaments that I've been trying. This is the one I've played the most on stream, probably, and maybe also the simplest. However, I also think it's probably the best version, and people still aren't really trying it like this. So to run through it very quickly, it's very standard tier core, and you cut the merrlis, and you've cut the Yugioh, cut the kill back down to 1, and in its place you've added the 3 sea mares. And notice I've still omitted Ash because I don't think it's that good against anything except Maxi, and this deck really isn't that bad against Maxi. I've kept with 2 snows because you really want to mill it so you can kill through Maxi, as well as just having it on the first turn is very, very strong. I've also chosen to add Night Sword Serpent and 4-Mage Trick Clown. I just wanted to increase the number of good mills in my deck because without the merrlis and the Celica one now as well, you kind of lose the benefit of the strong mill. Sometimes they just feel kind of weak. So this is extension to give you to rank 4 plays. So that way you get Bestial, you have backup plans as well. And it's general extension that's good to have. These cards have been pretty solid. Now you could play multiple Trick Clowns, but I like the Night Sword Serpent because that's used multiple effects per turn. Obviously we hit both. And the Night Sword Serpent has the synergy with Tearlaments Grief, where you can send a water from the field for Rhino Heart, and then the Sword Serpent will come back. And then obviously Trick Clown is better with Super Poly. They have their advantages and disadvantages, but both are great cards that I've been liking a lot on this deck to just make the quality of mills better. Now you may notice that I'm not playing Caldo here, and this comes up in a lot of my Tearlaments versions right now, and that is with the Yugioh cards being so heavily restricted, they're no longer starter cards or extenders. They almost rarely ever come together, like the chance of drawing multiples, so that in a way that you can use them as extension. They become good mills and good discards, and that's okay, but their purpose in the deck does change. And when they change in that capacity, it's important to keep your deck consistent. Now, if you feel like there's not that many graveyard effect decks in the meta, like you're playing a lot of cash, then you don't want to overdo the shufflers, because while they are good cards, if they're not extension pieces, you have to make sure it lines up with your game plan when milling them. So you could very easily put the Caldo in if you start expecting a lot more Tier Mares or just any deck where you want more graveyard hate. However, I decided to have the more level 4 extension-based cards like the Clown and the Serpent in their place. Now, my other versions may increase the number of cards I want to mill, or may decrease the cards I want to mill. And you'll see my ratio for the Yugioh cards kind of correlates with that. So the role of Yugioh cards already changed a bit when they went down to 5 earlier with the 1-1-1-2. And now even more so with just the 3 legal copies you can play. And I think that's very important that you shift your perspective on how those work. Now also in this deck, you may have heard me talk about Tearlaments Grief not being that good of a card. And while I don't love that card, I like it a lot more in this deck because it gives you more extension. But now, before you were often searching merrli off of kit to summon it, now it's not that great. You're going to have to get other stuff as well. You're going to have to get Sharon. And that kind of feels like a bad mill. But this way, if you have Grief as your extender, you can just get Scream and then use the Grief to summon from deck to send off the kit in mill 5. While this doesn't like strike you as great, you do need an alternative, and it's been okay. It gives you a little more good mills as well if you have to banish the traps. I don't love Grief. However, I do think you need a little more starters and a little more extension in this deck with the merrlis gone. And it's okay. That being said, it is a cuttable card. I don't really stand behind it. It depends on the meta changes as well. As for non-engine, I'm stuck with Super Poly and Talents. Now this could change. The cash decks continue being very popular, and the Super Poly may change. However, you could also lean further into the graveyard-based decks like Tier and play Bestials. Yeah, and then the only other thing to talk about is desires. I'm a big fan of this. I think if you're playing a kind of standard version of tier, desires is great because you're unlikely to banish everything, and the 2 draws are so useful. And even if you only have 1 tier name, it's actually very possible to win the game still. Kit's just so good. You cycle the 1 kit every turn. You play control game with the snows, the sullix, the traps, and it's not hard to kind of just keep control of the field, ring 4s, and kit, and that's fine. That'll win you a lot of games, and then you can lethal shot with Ouroboros very often. So I don't think you really need to focus on like these crazy long combos that trigger all your tier effects. Literally just Sharon is fine. And then I'll go back to the C Mare, I guess, quickly. I don't know if I really talked about it enough, but it's another starter, another card that's fine into Maxi. Grief is particularly bad into Maxi, so I wanted to have 2 cards that kind of counterbalance each other there. So something that extended through the simple negations, and then a card that wasn't as bad into Maxi. And this seems like it's more engine than I had before in the deck, but I felt like you kind of need that because you can't push as harder with your actual engine. You lose, like, your engine's ceiling has gone down. You need to make that up with just playing more cards from your hand. Yeah, anyways, yeah, so that's how the main deck looks. I'm very happy with this. I've been playing on ladder, and it's been doing pretty good. As for the extra deck, though, it should be pretty standard. It's similar to what I played at the Master World Championship. I've talked about it a bunch. I really like the Zoo cards because it makes way more impactful Zeuses, where you can use them offensively and defensively in the same play. And then Dryden's obviously really good to play unevenly, to extend your own combos, and to clean up random cards. So huge fan of those, especially in this deck where you're playing a lot more level 4s. You really become a rank 4 toolbox alongside tier. The fact that you can argue other rank 4s in here as well. Dugaris is one. And then for the links, Sprint obviously does nothing anymore, and Elf is still okay because you can make stuff untargetable. However, I decided to cut it in the light of more rank 4s. Other options you could play Celine because you have a lot of spellcasters in here, and you can rank up or link up into Ouroboros or even Access Code or Appo if you choose to play. Given that the attributes in this deck are not actually that very heavily dark, like you look in the main deck, there's 4 dark monsters. It's very possible that you play other charmers besides dark. You could play Area, you could play Lina. I thought of playing Lina, and it's a card I really want to try because there's oftentimes you can link away the Clown or the Snow, and maybe even crashing it and searching it can be beneficial. In fact, sometimes turning the Trick Clown into a Lina that you crash to search Snow may get you out of a couple jams. So that's definitely a card to try that I have not had the chance to yet, but yeah, so that's how I feel about the first version of the deck. I don't want to talk about it for too long because there's 3 other versions I wanted to show you guys. This is the one I feel is the best. It's the most standard cookie cutter and mid-range, but it gets the job done. Its combos are powerful enough, it breaks through fields good enough, and it plays through disruptions good enough. So yeah, I mean, that's the one I would play. But there's other options to consider, and I could be wrong about how good they are. So I'm going to show you this one next. 7 access tier. Okay, so I did talk about before how one of the ways to build it was playing tier with the Chaos Ruler version based on level 7s and 1s. This is it. So playing a lot of Cash-Tir monsters acts as level 7s, as well as ways to kind of apply pressure outside of tier cards. So if we're expecting a lot of decks that are heavy Bestials, this is kind of nice because it means you have backup game plans to the tier cards, and you don't feel super reliable on them. You can obviously just play Cash-Tir cards and be fine. You know, this deck isn't really a Cash-Tir deck, and I wouldn't ever really try and rely on the Cash-Tir cards alone. It shows 7 level 1 tuners and 7 cash cards. This ratio probably has to change and move around a bit when you run some math on it. I haven't had the luxury of doing that yet, and that's probably a mistake. However, leave that chore to you guys to figure out. But that's the general idea, is to have a 7 and 1 sync over Chaos Ruler, and that leads into the cash play, or into the tier plays. And then Jet Synchron is one of the level 1 tuners because obviously you can normal it and it's fine. We can also mill it. If you normal summon it with a Fenrir or a Unicorn, you can also bring it back and then use that plus the Chaos Ruler to make Hot Red. So that can be an interrupt as well. Something that beats evenly because, you know, I don't think the card is good, but a lot of people struggle with it. So that's an option there. Notice I'm also playing Trishula. It happens with the Snows and other level 4s that you can get the 2 4s and a Jet onto the field at the same time. And Trish just cleans up grave and field a lot. Especially given that I'm not playing Shufflers here. I don't have that much graveyard disruption. It's just the Dweller, really. So the Trish can pick up a little bit of the slack in that department when the Shufflers aren't there. No Shufflers because they're a little bricky. You are kind of managing more engines here that don't have the most synergy. So you have to be careful with the amount of go-to mills you play. Now, Water Spirit's the other weird card here. Now, this is one of the first tuners that was ever printed, and the goal for it is simple. It's just a level 1 tuner, and then it's an Aqua. It's the only one of its kind. The only other one is not really viable, and that is the Lady of the Noble Knights, because she says you can only use her for Noble Knight monsters, which doesn't help. The point is here, though, you can synchro with the Water Spirit for Chaos Ruler, and then when you mill a Tear, you now have an Aqua engraved to fuse for Kit. Because if you aren't playing more Aquas, like the Sea Mare, or in this, the Water Spirit, your mills aren't actually going to be meaningful, because you're going to mill a Tear, and the OD card you're going to be able to make is Muddragon. That's not actually useful, so you need something else there. Some people play the King of the Swamp stuff, but the only reason you play those in OCG and TCG is because you don't have access to Kit. If you have access to Kit, then any Aqua will do. It's worth in these decks noting you can play other non-engine like Gamma Seals maybe that function in the Aqua position, but I figured Water Spirit would be nice because it can function as that synchro material, already be in the graveyard there, and then you can fuse with it. So far it's been fine. Some awkward hands have come up where you draw the Aqua Spirits or the Water Spirits and the Jet Synchrons with no 7s because they really don't function by themselves. But that is why we want to mess around with the ratios a little more. And it's very possible you have to change that up. And then Veiler is a light to revive or to banish for Chaos Ruler, to add off Chaos Ruler, and a tuner. So I've been liking that. And then if my other non-engine was Super Poly, however, that could also change if the meta says Super Poly isn't as impactful anymore. It's also a little more awkward with the cash cards because if you want to lead a cash card, and sometimes you have to poly in the draw phase, so that can make things a little awkward. But yeah, so there's some cool synergies here as well, though. Snow can banish your Cash-Tir cards to turn on the Preparation, which is super sick. And because Prep and Birth can bring back the banished Cash-Tir cards, you also are continuously fueling your Snow. So once you get going, this deck is really high impact. You're going to have a lot of heavy beat sticks. You're going to have attacking them from several fronts with Unicorn Fenrir, the tier plays being the tier fusions and the traps. You can make rank 4s with Dweller and Redoer. You can make Mind Hacker, and you can also make synchros like Trishula and Hot Red. It becomes very hard opponent to deal with. But this deck was very cool for me. However, you do sometimes have some weird hands with the cash cards and the tiers just not having the most synergy. But yeah, I liked this deck a good amount, and I think it is worth exploring. Okay, so that's the most experimental version of Cash-Tir, and I urge you guys to try a little more. It's not like this straight up just mix cash with tier, because I don't think that makes sense. Next up is a more classic one that I've honestly spent not as much time looking at. And that is a simple Punk tier. Now, a lot of people really like this deck. For me, it feels really weak into Maxi. That's why this is the one version where I still have Ashes in the main deck. And because you're discarding a lot with the Punk cards, I did keep in the Shufflers as well. And I'm not as heavy rank 4 based, so I've also left out the Trickle on the Serpents. So I still have a lot of good discards and mills here, including the third Snow. It's the fact that I can comfortably discard and not feel, bad. And the game plan here is similar. It's Chaos Ruler .deck. Here you can push a little further. Instead of making Hot Red afterwards, you're going to make the Zombie Vampire afterwards, where it's Yamin, your note for Foxy Tune, a Chaos Ruler, bring back the Foxy Tune, Zombie Vampire. So you go through your deck there. There's no extra Aquas in this deck. You could easily try fitting Gamma Seals as your non-engine maybe to try and mix it up, because sometimes you'll have a problem where you just can't actually mill good Aquas here. I think Fenrir's as well is non-engine because they have a little bit of synergy with the Punk cards. When you have Zayamin, Teleport, something like that, you can make Baron pretty early, which can help mitigate risk into Maxi, as well as play through Disruption. What else I don't love about the Punk cards is, with the exception of Teleport, they kind of feel really weak as normal summons into removal. With the negations, they tend to be pretty solid, but removal card effects, or even like Snow, it tends to not be that good. So that's my biggest hesitation with something like this. But this is a solid deck, and you can very easily do well with it, so give it a try. Now, I'd like to maybe fit Call by the Graves across it in there, because again, Maxi is a lot more of a bane to this deck than other decks. It's a lot harder to just go Rhino, Kit, pass, although you can. I also left out Rhoda here because too many normal summons would be bad, but these are things you can consider to try and offset these problems. I'm just giving you kind of my knowledge, and you can take my knowledge and at least my initial insight and go from there. So the last version is a little weird. It's not playing Maxi, and this is not because I wouldn't play Maxi. This is kind of because it's built for a non-Maxi format. I know there's a couple of Discord servers that like to use tournaments where Maxi isn't legal. You could change this and add 3 Maxis, and then, in fact, you could probably just add the Maxis, and it's fine, and play 45. This deck doesn't care about deck total that much. However, the biggest problem with this deck is it is really bad into Maxi. If you get Maxi, this deck has to kill that turn or has to deck out. And it is possible. However, with the deck out, you have to make sure you're fast, which is hard, and you have to be practiced that. And OTKing obviously isn't possible on the first turn. That being said, you probably can work on this deck to get it to that level. In fact, maybe you can fit a Necrophases to get that job done. Although that would affect consistency in a negative way. But yeah, so if this looks familiar though, it does look pretty similar to the Niagara decks that we played, or the Danger Tier decks around the time of Niagara, Rio, before Snow got banned in the TCG. And really, it's just Dangers to fuel Curious into Zeroboros, clear fields, and you're setting up your tier combos along the way. So you get the mill a bunch, the Snow setup, and then you can make, you know, whatever you want. So it's super flexible, and this deck is really strong going second, because the Dangers just give you so much push. You mill through your deck, and when you go first as well, uninterrupted, your end field is insane. You're going to have multiple Snows, as well as like every pretty much trap setup. And the Shufflers, it's really hard to beat. So something that's a bit weird in this deck is the Gizmex. This was something in the TCG that I saw someone do at the European WCQ, and I liked it a lot. I played it in my own decks at Rio and Niagara, and this card is really good at just putting up bodies to make Curious with, for fueling Zeroboros, for triggering Zeroboros, and just applying pressure and dealing damage. So it may look unorthodox, but I like this card a lot. And again, I really think you can just be greedy with your desires of your Gizmex. You'll get used to it, trust me, and it may be a bit harder to play and a bit harder to learn, but it's worth it to get used to playing with those diminished resources. Because one, it makes you better, but two, it's very possible to still win, like a lot of the time. Even if you banish both Havnesses or whatever, or both Sharons, you can win on just one tier name, or even sometimes with 0. It's not that hard. You aren't playing this fusion deck, you're playing a link climb deck almost, that has a fusion engine to kind of push it along and facilitate heavier Snow plays. At the end of the day, Snow is like the killer for a lot of these decks. So the part of the tier is to set up huge amount of mills with a little bit of bodies to push the combos along, and a little bit of interrupts that aid the Snow, which sounds weird to say, but a lot of the times that's how I look at it and how I play it, and it's been working well. Snow is just nuts. So this deck, it's very heavy on mills and discards, which is why I've kept both Shufflers in here. I'm also playing Destrudo. Destrudo is a really cool one when you're playing decks to play 3s and 4s. If you've seen my Danger Thunder deck, it's similar, because when you have the 3 and the 4 on the field, you can Destrudo target the 3, becomes a 4, and then you can make Chaos Ruler. Now you can also put Baron in the deck, because you have a 7 and a 4 on the field. You can Destrudo target the 4, summon the Destrudo, and then make a Baron with a 7. That one's also a very good line. I didn't have space for the Baron here. You can easily fit it. Garrus and Redo are both not super mandatory, but I wanted to have him in there for now. And also neither is Unicorn. That could also be Azalea. But yeah, that's kind of the general idea here. It's a lot more like a Danger deck where you're OTKing. You're setting up a heavy graveyard for Snow to work with. So yeah, those are the 4 ways that I go about building tier, and my thoughts about when each would be good. I think the Punk tier is probably the one I think is the most bait, because it's just kind of weak to removal and into Maxi. I think the Danger tier is great when you're not playing with Maxi, or if you're going to be like just heavier combo player, which I think is fine. It's fun. And I think in like a very neutral format that's diverse, standard old rank 4 axis tier, let's call it, would be this type of variant. Lean, consistent, and still powerful. And if there's heavy bestials, you can play something like this, and you have more backup options to play through those. That brings me to the end, guys. I hope you learned a lot from the 4 deck refiles I briefly gave. I know tier content can be a bit tiresome, which is why I didn't explain much about the actual tier cards themselves. But either way, I hope it was still informative and there was something to learn. If you want to see me play this deck more, you probably will only be able to do so on my Twitch, or now on that VOD channel that I posted about. Let me know what else you guys want to see on this channel. I'll be posting more TCG and Master Duel content, as well as vlogs. Expect the Japan vlog to come out soon, and I will see you guys in the future. Peace.